Welcome to another ghoulish episode of the Indie Film Academy's October Shockathon. Today we're talking with the Last Exorcism's Daniel Stamm. So,
You take two ripe bananas, you put them in a bowl, and you put some sugar, and you go ahead and bake it for 400. You can go and pull it out and have yourself banana bread. Hallelujah!
Welcome to the Indie Film Academy podcast, where it's all about learning how to make and market your independent film online. And now your host, Jason Buff.
hello and welcome to the Indie Film Academy podcast. We're going to continue our October Shockathon, even though technically we are in November, but I have so many great horror filmmakers to talk to, and I just, if you're like me, I want to keep October going up until maybe around December, so we'll just kind of keep going with it. Today we're talking with the director of one of my absolute favorite films, The Last Exorcism. Daniel Stamm is with us today, and I'm really excited for you guys to listen to what we talk about. I learned a whole lot, and one of the biggest things I got out of this was Daniel's checklist that he goes through. He's known for being a very prepared director, and he actually gave me his checklist of things that he looks at before he directs a scene. So if you go to indiefilmacademy.com /IFA33, that should be the page that has all that information on it. It has the podcast and everything as well. So check out that page if you want to get that full listing, and we talk about that later. Also, I want you to remember that we have our masterclass coming up on November 17th and 18th. We're going to be talking to a bunch of experts in film sales about what you need to sell your film at the end of the process and all the things you need to know as you're starting your film to make sure that after you finish the editing and all that, you can sell it. So that starts November 17th. When you sign up, we'll send you an email that will get you free access into the summit. It's free for 2 days. And then after that, there will be a payment option so that you can have it for the rest of your life. We have tons and tons of information. I learned a whole lot doing these interviews with people, all about American film market, what you need, all the kinds of files you need to provide to distributors. It's kind of boring, but it's really important to know. And I know a lot of filmmakers want to talk about cameras and they want to talk about, all this fun stuff at the beginning of the process, but it's really important to know what you're going to do with your film after you're done and to make sure that you can sell it. So anyway, we talked to Jason Brubaker, Jerome Quishon, John Reese, Linda Nelson, Alex Ferrari, Scott McMahon, Christopher Holland, just a ton of different people, a lot more than that, but tons of people who give all kinds of different insights about how you can sell your film. Okay, moving on. I also want to let you know that if you want a free audiobook on filmmaking, you can go to IFAfreebooks.com and you can download 2 free books from Audible. Now, they have a ton of audiobooks about filmmaking. One of my favorites is Robert McKee's Story. And one thing that I do when I'm writing is I'll write for a while and I'll create all my notes and everything. And then just as I'm driving in my car, I'll listen to a book on screenwriting. And it's just nice to have somebody kind of like your coach in your car with you every day as you're driving. Maybe you're driving to work or maybe you're picking up your kids or whatever, wherever you're driving to, just going to the grocery store. You can have Robert McKee in your car, in your passenger side, talking to you about screenwriting. But there's a ton of different books there. So just go to IFA Free Books and you can download 2 completely free. So what is that like? Having Robert McKee sitting beside you for free and coaching you on your screenplay. Anyway, check it out. All right, here is my interview with Daniel Stamm.
Exorcism is alive and well. The Bible is filled with demons. If you believe in God, you have to believe in the devil. We're looking for the Sweetser farm.
You want to make a U-turn, and then I want you to go back where you came from.
Jeez, go!
Seems like the end of the road.
Mr. Sweetser, how you doing? Cotton Market.
My wife died 2 years ago. It's quite a shock for Nell.
Were you very close?
She was my best friend.
Somehow, the devil got in her.
Nell, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Nothing to be nervous about.
What is it? It's coming through my skin. Please help. Get it out of my...
Let him come now.
No!
Where's Nell?
In the fire. Here, kitty, kitty.
No. Oh my God. Turn off that light. Let's get out of here.
If you can't save my daughter's soul, I will.
Go! Go! You should be compelled to leave this girl. If I beseech our Lord, you may be led down wild to the desert.
In the name of Jesus Christ, I command thee to be gone!
Sure.
And I think the best place to start is going into when film really kind of affected you, like the films that that kind of convinced you that you wanted to do this for a living when you were growing up.
Well, my dirty secret is always that I didn't start out wanting to make movies. I was a big role-playing game nerd, a lot of Dungeons and Dragons in my teens and all that stuff. And I always thought I have to find some kind of job where I can keep playing Dungeons and Dragons, basically, and get paid for it. So I wanted to be a writer. And
okay.
I was kind of looking around in Germany for programs where I could study writing, because German parents won't let you just do something if you don't get a diploma for it. They don't take it seriously. So I knew I had to look for something where I could get a diploma and it would kind of be taken seriously. So I always said I wanted to be a journalist, which was a complete lie, because I wanted to write novels, make stuff up. That was always amazing to me, just the feeling that you could sit down with a couple of people and make something up, and suddenly it exists in everyone's minds. And you have like this, this godlike power of creativity was always mind-blowing to me. And I think once you've experienced that, it kind of gets addictive. There was never like a question that I could do anything else. So then I ended up at a film academy in Germany, in Ludwigsburg, which was kind of the most modern film school in Germany. They're very renowned, traditional, old film schools in Germany that Wim Wenders and Fassbinder and all, like the Werner Herzog, all the old German greats went to. And then this film school opened up, and it was very commercial. It didn't only support like making movies. It made commercials, it made TV shows, it made all that kind of stuff that the other schools frowned upon. And I studied screenwriting there, and I was there for 4 years. And wrote my little screenplays, and then I would give it to a directing student, and that directing student would go off and make the movie, and it'd be horrendous, which you always think, looking back now, they were pretty brilliant. But of course, as a writer at the time, you're so stuck on what you have in your head that no matter what they come back with, it's never what you imagined it like,
Right.
Yeah. I should have given them some more slack. But they also always came back with these amazing stories that were like adventure stories, because there was always, everyone who's tried making a movie knows that there are always unsurmountable conflicts, and it's a team sticking their head together and trying to figure it out, and the actresses are beautiful, and there's romance on set. It's all that stuff that you kind of yearn for, and you're locked out of all of that as a screenwriter. And I always had the feeling the storytelling process is kind of artificially cut in half, because I've already figured out the story, I have the characters in my head. All I need to do is to communicate that to the actors and the cinematographer and the production designer, and I can call myself a director. It was always weird to me that there was some random person coming in halfway through the process, taking over, being the big shot that then gets all the credit for the movie.
Right.
So I thought I can do that too. But then my friends at the German film school, they weren't that taken with their directing program. So when I decided to study directing, I knew I didn't want to do it there, even though it's a great school. But I came to Los Angeles and studied at AFI, the American Film Institute here. And I was, lucky. It's a crazy expensive school, which I had to learn that everything in the States is, because in Germany it's free. You go to film school, it's an application process. It's kind of tough to get through. But once you do get through it, you don't have to pay anything. And then AFI suddenly was like $100,000 or something crazy, which I didn't have. So it took me a year and a half to raise the funds through scholarships from different organizations and all that, which was kind of a job in itself. And then I came here, all bushy-tailed and wide-eyed, to Hollywood, which still kind of amazes me. Every time I take the exit ramp and it says Hollywood, I'm always like, oh man, I'm in Hollywood. That never wears off. And then I found out that the German Film Academy that I went to, they had sent a group to the American Film Institute before they started the school for a week to explore and to do research. And then they basically rebuilt the American Film Institute in Germany, like the structure, the curriculum, everything, the people they hired even. It was weird because I was like, I knew everything about the school and I'd never been there because it was a one-to-one copy of the whole thing. And then I started directing short films there and kind of met my team there that I'm still working with, my cinematographer and my editor. We worked together there. And it was kind of a great environment because the German film school didn't have the language barrier. Everyone that was studying there came either from Germany, Switzerland, or Austria. So there weren't very big differences in cultural approaches to narrative, to storytelling, to filmmaking. But at AFI, my first group was a Native American writer, an Australian cinematographer, an Asian production designer, and a Indian editor. And we were making, me as a German director, and we made a hip hop movie, which none of us knew anything about. Yeah?
Of course, that's what you made.
Exactly. But it was cool because you suddenly get challenged all the time. All these things that you kind of take for granted and have never thought about, like your editor will suddenly let a wide shot stand for 2 minutes, and you kind of go crazy, and you go like, we can't do that. And she says, why can't we do that? And suddenly you have to search inside of yourself what your impulse is, where that's coming from, that you can't do that. Like everything, every creative decision, you suddenly have to verbalize and discuss with the team. And there are some fights that you win and some fights that you lose. And AFI was very concerned with kind of de-emphasizing the power of the director, which I think was really helpful, that you weren't the big shot. You didn't get to call all the shots. Like the first short film was initiated by the writer. So the writer had all the power, which created complete chaos because obviously the writers were like in character completely different from the directors. Like the directors normally are these kind of grandiose, confident people, and the writers are these really sweet, kind of smart, but introverted people. So it kind of put everything on its head. And it was a really good process because you couldn't just take something for granted and just pull the director card and do it. And then there was a seminar for the cinematographers, I think in second year, where one of the teachers told the class a genius thing that changed my life, which is tell your directors to shoot. Don't spend years fundraising. Don't spend years developing because it's a trap. Like many of my friends that did that, they are still fundraising. They're still developing something and have been for 10 years. And they never shot a frame because they kind of missed that momentum, and it's hard to get that back out of nowhere. Yeah. So my cinematographer called me every day and said, are we shooting something yet? And I always said, I don't have a script. And he said, it doesn't matter, let's shoot something. And that's exactly what we did. We kind of looked for a story that would support us not having any money, because no one had any money. You were coming out of film school, you're completely broke. Digital this was in 2004. Kind of, you could shoot digital, but it was still kind of expensive. So another seminar at AFI actually taught you to concentrate on what you have and build your project, your first project after film school, around that, rather than trying to achieve things that you don't have. So if you know a great actor, write something for that actor. If you know a great location, build something about that. If you have access to a crazy advanced camera, then construct something where you can show that up. And we were sitting down and we basically said, okay, we have nothing. What have we got to construct something about? But what you have in Los Angeles, of course, which is a tragedy for them, but great for us, is you have so many good actors out of work that would do anything for no money. And if you can just find them and give them something worthwhile to do, you don't really have to pay them. So we decided that we'd make a fake documentary, which at the time, that was kind of before the whole fake documentary wave. Like Blair Witch had been made 5 years earlier, but had kind of not really spawned any new movies yet. This was before Paranormal Activity and all that. And we thought, if we shoot in that format, we don't have to light anything. Everything can look gritty and bad, and it doesn't matter, because if it looks bad, that's just adding to the realism of it all. So let's shoot in that style. We'll just get a video camera that one of our actors had, and we borrowed it from him. And then we came up with this story that there is a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker in film school, and for his thesis project, he is finding a suicidal guy on Craigslist and basically is following him through his last weeks. And then, of course, there are all kinds of complications there. Becoming friends, and the sound girl he's falling in love with the sound girl, and all kind of complications.
Right.
But we had 4 pages. We didn't have a script, and I was so traumatized from AFI, from the process of working with a screenwriter, because me as a screenwriter myself, of course, we were bumping heads all the time. So why I wouldn't have shot anything for a decade, probably like everyone else, is that I was so exhausted. And even the thought of getting together with the screenwriter again and writing something kind of sounded crazy to me. So this project that we went into with a 4-page outline was kind of perfect. And then we improvised all the scenes with the actors and made that movie. The downside was, because we didn't have a script, it was never over. We were kind of improvising scenes into the blue. And if something didn't work, then we would just shoot more scenes and shoot more material. And it took us 3 years to make the movie in the end. And of course, like, the toughest thing is to support yourself while you're making your movie, and you're kind of fanatically, single-mindedly focused on making that movie. But at the same time, you kind of have to eat and pay rent and all that stuff. So that was a tough time. But in the end, at some point, it was done. And then we submitted it to AFI Fest, to the festival, at which we were always told AFI graduates don't get into AFI Fest because they don't want to be seen as kind of leaning towards their own people and all that stuff. But somehow we got in, and we won the Audience Award, which was a big thing at the time, because other films that had won the Audience Award were like Hotel Rwanda and Life is Beautiful and all these kind of big movies. And suddenly there was our small movie in between there that no one had ever heard about.
You haven't, it's A Necessary Death, right?
It's A Necessary Death, yeah. It's on Netflix right now.
Oh, really? Oh, great. Yeah. I've watched a lot of some of the footage you put on YouTube.
Oh yeah. Those were
but I was trying to watch it and yeah, that's great.
Oh, that must have been so weird to just watch the deleted scenes of something. Yeah. It's a whole new approach.
So let me talk a little bit about that. In terms of improvisation, how would you guys, like, say you're going out to shoot one day? How would you put that together?
Well, I think that the main thing is to, in the beginning, understand that it's a completely different talent to have for an actor to be good at improvising than to be good at making written lines come to life and appear fresh and as if they're being said for the first time. One of my actors put that really well, that there is a different part of your brain that processes making up lines for the first time rather than regurgitating lines. Mm-hmm. And that's something that a lot of producers I later learned don't really know about. Like, if you're making an improv project, then you have to cast improv people. It doesn't make any sense to give them a scene and lines and see if they can make that come to life, because it won't help you in the moment at all. So I was very much focused on finding great improvisers. And what you kind of get as a bonus is that you end up with very smart people, because improvising takes a lot of brain power and you have to be very fast thinking on your feet and you have to be very high energy, which is really important. I didn't know that at the time, but you really are looking for someone who has higher energy than real life. Like, if you take people that are very authentic, but they all kind of are either normal life speed or slightly slower, it'll bore you to death on camera, and you kind of have to try to make up for it in editing and all that kind of stuff. And it's hard. So luckily I ended up with very eloquent, very smart people. And then we kind of went out, and I always gave them a paragraph and said, okay, this is the scene we're coming from. The great thing is that you can shoot in chronological order, which is huge, of course, for the actors to be able to kind of base their performance on the scene you're just coming from, which you don't have in normal narrative movies because they're always scheduled by location. And sometimes you shoot the climax, the third act first, and then go back to the third act first, and then go back to the first act, and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of brain power always goes to kind of reminding the actors where they're coming from and all that. So that was easier for us because they knew where we were coming from, but I would summarize it for them again, and then kind of tell everyone what they are trying to achieve in this scene, and not give them the outcome, and just kind of give them the intention that they're going into the scene with, and really talk that up to them, and sometimes take them aside and talk to them separately so that they don't overhear what the other person's objective is. And then we would just shoot and shoot and shoot. And because it was video, we didn't have to, care about how much material we were shooting. So the first take was always 20 minutes long. And then we did the second take, and I kind of pointed out which the great moments were. And we boil it down to 10 minutes, and then to 5 minutes, and then to 2 minutes, and then to 1 minute. And in the end, we ended up cutting all these things together. And oftentimes we ended up with the first take, with parts of the first take, because it was kind of the freshest, because it was the first time that they would come up with this stuff. And to kind of keep it as fresh as possible, I would always say new words, make up new words, don't repeat stuff that you've said in the last take, the way you said it in the last take. Keep the ideas, but phrase it differently. Try different things, try to surprise each other. And they were up for that. And they really loved each other, which was great because we spent, as I said, 3 years together, kind of making up stuff together. And if there had been one bad apple in that group, I think it would have been really problematic. But it was a really great core group of 4 people. And then the team only consisted of those 4 people. And then my cinematographer and me, I did sound. So altogether we were 6 people. And
so you were directing and doing sound at the same time?
Yeah. That kind of worked. That wasn't the problem. It's like very do-it-yourself. We didn't have a single location permit or anything. If necessary, we could cramp the entire team plus equipment into a car. If we didn't have a location, we would just shoot the scene in the car. It was like very fast. Nothing took a big setup. It's really a big relief if you don't have to make it pretty. You don't have to light it pretty. You don't have to find a great location, but you go for realism. All that stuff, all the design stuff is off your chest. You just have to, as a director, it's hard. And as a cinematographer too, it's hard to let that go because it kind of, it does something to your ego that in the beginning is very uncomfortable. But then after a couple of days, you kind of switch to that. My cinematographer, he's such a good cinematographer. He's Hungarian, and he would kind of, if he could, he would shoot black and white, high contrast, that he's like a Vilmos Zsigmond disciple. And it was really hard for him to switch to making it ugly. And he would frame things so perfectly that from every now and then while we were shooting, I would have to bump into him so that the camera would shake. And then after a week, he came to me and he said, I get it now, I get it. And he started, the big breakthrough for him was that he started listening to the actors, which he wasn't used to because the cinematographers are so focused on the framing, on the image, that usually they don't listen to the actors. But because he had to listen to the actors, because if they were suddenly pointing something out outside of frame, then he would have to pan over and show that. In the beginning, some actors were like, oh, look over there. And the camera would stay on the actor. And I would always have to tap him on the shoulder and go like, pan over. And after a week, he kind of totally switched to that. So that was great. So that would be my big advice, I think, about making your first movie. I know it's tempting to really let your creative juices flow and to write something in the French Revolution or something in outer space or something, but it will never get made. Like Hollywood is so fear-driven that no executive will give you money to make your first movie. That's the problem. You have to have made a movie to make your first movie. And short films don't count. That's the problem. I know that short films are great to kind of learn stuff for yourself, but it's a total illusion that you can show a great short film and someone will say, you are displaying such talent that now we're going to give you millions and millions to make your first feature. I think that was the case once, and there are a couple of famous examples where that might have happened, but that's like 1 in a million. And to bet your career on that is kind of crazy. So I think what you do have to shoot for these days is to make a feature, make it as independently as possible. If you are waiting for someone else to give you the green light, I can promise you that you will never shoot. Like if you rely on someone else's money, you get all these stories where someone prepared and prepped and they were ready to shoot, and then everything fell apart. Like almost every story ends like that,
It's really funny that you're saying that, because you're almost exactly describing the scenario that I went through, because we had a screenplay and we had all these investors and all these things that were going on, and it completely, I kept waiting and waiting and waiting for everything to be perfect, and then it fell apart, So now what we're doing is just taking the money that we have and we're going out and shooting something, just getting out and shooting and making something, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the hardest step, because I think filmmakers are kind of perfectionists by nature. So it's the impulse is, I think, very common to wait for perfect conditions, but perfect conditions will never be there and money will always go away. Like my whole first movie cost $3,000 altogether. Like everything was on, we got used tapes and we taped over the dailies of Day After Tomorrow. And, and everyone brought their own lunch. I didn't have any money to do anything. I was sleeping on a friend's couch at times. Like it was very, very clear. I promised everyone no one will ever make a dime from this, which changed everything, because suddenly it's okay for everyone to work for free if they know that you also are putting in all the work and you swear to them that you will never make a dime from it. Mm-hmm. Like the Netflix money we're giving away to charity, because I have to keep up this promise that no one can ever make any money from this movie. And that helps. That freed everything up, and everyone kind of contributed and brought their editing system and their camera and their sound equipment and their this and that. And it was kind of a really good time. But all that started with finding a story that you can shoot in a non-pretty way. And how that really helped me later. I mean, I was lucky with all this stuff, because what I learned, what I didn't know coming out of film school, is that you have to do something that Hollywood, that is new and worthwhile to Hollywood. Like the other things that no one in Hollywood will ever help you just out of the goodness of their heart. You have to get to a place somehow where you have something that they want, And coming out of film school, of course, we always thought we have to emulate Hollywood. Like the biggest thing to us was like getting a helicopter shot. Like if we could get a helicopter shot, then we'd made it, which is complete nonsense, because the one thing that Hollywood has is money. Like they can have all the helicopter shots that they want. It's not going to impress them. If you have a great stunt, it's not going to impress them. You have to give them something where they go like, oh, we didn't have that before. And it's not, so it can't be about money. That was the big revelation afterwards, that we luckily went the right direction out of dumb luck, because we didn't have money. So we really focused on performances and getting very authentic moments and kind of making this heart-wrenching drama thing. And because all that we had was time, there's always this kind of saying that you have to, out of quality, time and money, you can choose two. You can either get something great and make it cheaply, but it will take a long time, or you can make something great and it'll take forever, or it'll be fast, but it won't be cheap, and all these things. And I think that is really true. So we didn't have money, but we had all the time in the world, and we wanted to make something great. So we kind of concentrated on that. And then when we had made the movie, it turned out that that's exactly what Hollywood was looking for at the time, because the fake documentary thing was just coming up and was becoming popular. And they were looking for someone to be able to work in that medium and get great performances out of it. So that's how I got my first kind of studio job with the Lionsgate project that then became The Last Exorcism.
Okay. Was there the idea when you went out to shoot that it's like, since we're shooting video, let's just try, if we shoot like, say, an hour, let's try to have at least 5 minutes of that be gold that we can cut out? Or was that kind of your process with, back in those days, I think that shooting in video and if you're shooting that in film, you have to kind of be like, okay, we have to get it on this take. You know what I mean? So you're not afforded that. When you're shooting video, it's a lot easier.
It's huge for the creative process. Someone said that in an acting workshop at AFI, and it was amazing, that the most valuable words that you can ever say as a director is, I don't know, let's try it. It might not work. Mm-hmm. Which is exactly the opposite of what you think a director should do, because you always have the feeling the director has to have the vision and has to know exactly what they want, and they have to be able to communicate it to everyone, and then everyone is trying to hit that on the nail somehow. And if you do that, then that's a lot of pressure to put on all your creative collaborators, because they have to kind of try to hit your vision exactly. But if you say, guys, I don't really have a vision, let's just play and experiment and we'll come up with something together, then suddenly you take all that pressure away from them and you allow them to contribute. Everyone's waking up and is going like, oh my God, they want my input. They don't just want me to execute something that they have preconceived, but they actually want me to be involved in the creative process itself. And suddenly you get stuff that is not filtered through one mind. You know, if you are that kind of filmmaker that is kind of exerting that power and putting your vision on everyone, then that means that everything that ends up on screen is filtered through your mind. And if you're a genius, that might be great. If you're a David Fincher or a, Orson Welles or whatever, but I'm not, and I know that. And so it's a big asset to me to get a group of people together that I think are funny and witty and brilliant and fast, and get all these anarchic ideas and these moments in the scenes together, and then be able to cut my scene together from all these moments that I didn't preconceive, but that were little gifts that came out during shooting, and they only came out because I gave them that freedom to just play and try stuff out. And some stuff will be totally off and will not work at all, but that's fine because we're shooting on video. And it's not that every second is golden because we're shooting on film and every second costs so much money. But video really allowed me to kind of open that up and say, we have the whole day for these 3 scenes. Let's just see what happens. And there wasn't a single day when there weren't moments coming up that were completely surprising and a complete gift. And over 3 years, honestly, I never went home not being totally ecstatic about the day. And that's, I think, the only thing that can get you through this long shoot, because that's the only payoff you have, is that you lie in bed at night and you go like, I can't believe that moment happened today. That look between 2 people happened today. That line, that idea, that this, that. And it's the most satisfying thing. And you never get that with a script, because with a script, or you rarely get that with a script, because with a script, you have a very preconceived idea of what the scene is going to be and how it's going to look. And most of the time, the best thing you can do is to kind of achieve that. It's rare that you suddenly see something come to life in front of you that is so much better than what you had imagined in your wildest dreams in your mind.
Can you had told a story that I heard before about your screening in Kosovo. I was wondering if you could to talk about that for just a second. Yeah, because it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, that was crazy because I was at a Kosovo film festival with my thesis film, and then they invited me back the year later to be in the jury, or a couple of years later, I guess, because I did bring a rough cut of A Necessary Death, and there were 3 people in the jury, and everyone was screening some feature film project of theirs. And my colleagues' films, this sounds very arrogant, but I thought they were great, but they weren't necessarily mind blowing. But the audience went crazy, standing ovations, and I was like, oh my God, this is the best audience ever! Can't wait, cannot wait to show the rough cut of A Necessary Death. And it was something that my editor had put together. It was a cut that I hadn't even seen, so I was excited to see it. And we're screening the movie, and the movie is over. And I'm getting ready for my standing ovation and for people to come up to me and give me an Oscar. And there was complete silence, an absolute terrifying silence. And then there was like one person, which is the worst. Silence would have been, I thought in the moment, was the worst thing that could happen. But then I learned seconds later that's the second worst thing that could happen. Because then someone in the last row started clapping like this, which is like in a Western, when you want to...
The slow clap.
Yeah, the slow clap. It's like in a Western, when you want to show silence, you don't just have it silent, but you have like a coyote howl in the background.
There's like a cricket.
A cricket, exactly. That's what that was like. And I didn't get it. I was so impressed and taken with my own creation up there. And the great thing about fake documentaries is also because everyone is contributing, you don't have to be an egomaniac to love the product because it's everyone's creation together. Yeah. So I was really amazed by the thing and couldn't wrap my mind around why no one was responding to it. I thought it was so powerful. And then I was walking down the steps to do the Q&A, and I turned around and everyone was kind of moving in the audience, which was weird because normally for a Q&A you just stay in your seats and you don't get up and you don't walk, but people were walking out or running around or whatever. And then I realized that there were people in the audience that had broken down, and their friends were kind of gathering around them and pulling them back up to their feet and were talking to them and whatever. And next to me was a girl that was rocking back and forth, and she had her hand in her face in her hands, and the tears were running down her forearms. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, they didn't understand that this wasn't a real documentary. I didn't announce that beforehand. I didn't mean to fool anyone. There just wasn't a situation where you kind of would have announced it. And they were reacting to it as if they had just seen this guy kill himself on camera. And because the character is a very lovable character, they were devastated by it. And I was running around. It was the worst feeling because it's as if you had dropped this bomb on these people and they were seriously hurt. So I was running around trying to tell everyone that this is a fictional film, and they didn't get it. When I would say Matt, the suicidal guy, so there was Matt was the suicidal guy and Gilbert was the filmmaker that was following him. And I would tell someone who had broken down, Matt is an actor. And the first reply I got was like, does Gilbert know? I was like, no, Gilbert is an actor too. Like, it was so hard. And then there was one girl, an American girl, as you would imagine, that was attacking me. She was jumping at me and she grabbed me by the collar and she shook me. She was this tiny girl, but she was just in ninja mode or something. And she screamed at me, "You're a murderer. You shouldn't be allowed to make movies." And then her friends dragged her off. And then the organizer of the festival came up to me and whispered in my ear and said, "Stay where you are. Don't go outside. There is a mob gathering to deal with." Which is exactly the words you don't want to hear in Kosovo that had just been through a murderous war. Right. The last thing you want is a mob that's gathering. And
it's bad when you're the worst thing in Kosovo at that time.
Okay. And it was devastating. And then I phoned my team, my editor, and said, "We got to recut this movie. We got to change the ending." People were devastated. And she said, "Well, isn't that what we were going for?" Which is true. It is a tragedy. So you kind of want to evoke these emotions, but it felt as if we were playing unfairly. And for the first time, this whole sentence with there is responsibility in filmmaking and you have to take responsibility in filmmaking, I understood what that was about. I'd never understood that. Whenever people were talking about, Oliver Stone with Natural Born Killers got people to kill other people, I always thought, well, that's a powerful movie. If you can achieve that, obviously the movie worked. It's a tragedy for the people that died, but is it really up to the filmmaker to prevent that from happening? And after seeing that in action in Kosovo, it just wasn't fun. It wasn't a rewarding feeling of, look what we were able to do. We just never thought about the why. We worked so hard on trying to affect an audience emotionally, which you always do when you make a movie, that I never stopped to think, well, why are we doing this to them? We just try to get them to feel bad, but we don't give them anything in exchange, And that was kind of an epiphany to me. And then we did recut the movie, screened at South by Southwest, and then screened at AFI Fest and won the audience award, which I think we wouldn't have if we hadn't recut the movie. But it definitely was counterintuitive to say our movie is, this sounds very arrogant again, but our movie is too powerful for the audience to consume. We have to water it down, but that's kind of exactly what we did. And I think it was the right decision.
Well, that's really interesting. Can you talk about when you say give them anything in exchange and, that you went back and recut it, what did you recut and what was really the difference between the version they saw in Kosovo and the one that was at AFI?
Well, the big difference was the ending. We had shot two endings, one which was very straight. So just to spoil the whole movie. In the end, Matt, the suicidal guy, and Gilbert, the filmmaker, they're going into a garage together, and Matt is going to shoot himself, and Gilbert is going to film that. And one ending was we stay outside and we hear the shot, and then there's silence for a minute, and then Gilbert comes out and we see an inkling of Matt on the floor, and he has shot himself in the head. And you can see on Gilbert's face that what he just saw was so nightmarish that he'll never be able to forget that. And he kind of is paying the price for his ambition to become a great filmmaker or whatever. That was one ending, which we showed in Kosovo, which played it very straight. There's this guy who is announcing he's going to kill himself, and then he kills himself. The entire time what's going to happen, and you always kind of hope some miracle will happen, but guess what? The miracle doesn't happen, and that's it. And that was just devastating to people. The other ending that we had shot was that we stay outside of the garage, we hear the shot, and then there's a pause, and then we hear a second shot. And it takes us a moment to understand what was going on, and someone runs to open the garage, and both of them are on the floor, and it turns out that Matt has shot Gilbert before he shot himself because of the whole subplot with the sound girl, who was Gilbert's ex-girlfriend, and Matt was in love with her, and Gilbert, who wanted Matt to kill himself, took the girl away from him to not give him a reason to live and all that kind of stuff. So he shot Gilbert, which was the much more Hollywood twist ending, and played it much less straight and much less real. And it felt like that's exactly what people needed. They needed something that was kind of tipping it off and say, it's all right, this is a movie, here's a heightened reality, and also to punish Gilbert in a more conventional way for manipulating this guy that we'd fallen in love with into suicide. And now he paid the price by killing him, by himself, by being killed. So that kind of seemed to work. I think that was the main thing. And I think in general, it's always like you want to take something away from a story. I think that's the basis of storytelling, that we kind of communicate an insight into the world and into the human experience through a story, and you put your audience through different emotions and make them invested in the thing. But it's all with the implied promise that they will get something out of watching this for 2 hours that no one else knows. They will be let into a secret, that they can take away into their life with. And we didn't really supply that secret, I had the feeling. I was basically saying, here's a movie that will make you miserable and teach you nothing. And that's we're responding to it. That was a problem at the time.
Yeah. I think that's really, interesting, because with all the horror movies, the whole concept of a horror movie is that you're going to watch something that's horrible, that's something that's terrible, but there has to be some element of it that attracts people to it, that makes people want to experience that,
right.
And gives them that experience. One of the interesting things, you said when you were working on The Last Exorcism, and I want to go to that, in just a second, is just that the documentary format doesn't give the audience a place to hide.
Right.
And I thought that was really, interesting. It's like you have more power doing that.
Well, because you have the first person narrative. People are looking right into camera, and the cinematographer is a character in the film. He's not kind of this invisible floating camera, but there is a direct proxy for you as an audience member in the movie. And if there's danger coming towards the camera, it's coming towards you, and you're kind of aware that there's danger coming from 360 degrees. With a narrative conventional movie, you can always kind of count on them showing you what you need to see. Like if there's something that's important for you as the audience member to see and not to miss, they will make sure that they cut to that close-up or that insert or that whatever. And that kind of gives you a certain safety, because you're being taken by the hand and guided through this story by someone who already knows the path of the story. But with the fake documentary, it's all about the stuff that you miss and that you don't see, so that you keep the audience on their toes about, we might be showing you this side of the room right now, but that doesn't mean something can't jump out behind you at any moment, because, we don't really know what's going to happen. And this, right. We don't really know what's going to happen, I think, is a very important component in a fake documentary, especially in horror.
Right. And you see that a lot with, Spielberg used that in Saving Private Ryan, the idea of, and you see that in a lot of films, that you'll have a scene that's all handheld and is shot like a documentary, even though it's in a traditional narrative film.
Right.
Just to give people that feeling of uneasiness, and that at any minute something could kind of, affect your point of view or whatever.
Yeah. I think the other component is that moving images just stimulate the viewer and put an energy into the thing that the brain has to process. So there's just more happening on a very simple way. And if you have a locked off shot from a tripod, whatever is moving is just the object in the frame, but 90% of what you're seeing on screen doesn't move. Whereas as soon as you go handheld, that means every single piece of grain, it would have been in film world, but now pixel, moves at any split second. So I think there is something that is just kind of overwhelming to the brain, and that really kind of pumps up the adrenaline just by the virtue of going handheld. And the other thing that I found out about handheld that was amazing to me, and I still don't have an explanation for it, was when I was watching Lars von Trier's The Idiots. He has, everything is handheld and the performances are amazing. And then for some reason, there's some scene in the woods that is like a minute long where he suddenly is static on a tripod, and suddenly the performances suck. And I realized that handheld, for some reason, really helps out your performances. Like everything gets better if you go handheld. Maybe that is because the audience can't focus on every single twitch in a face at any moment. Like if there is a stale performance, probably if you have Meryl Streep and Amy Adams and John Malkovich, you're fine. You probably don't have to go handheld. But if you have performances that are on the staler side, going handheld suddenly gives that whole thing a vital effect that you otherwise wouldn't get. I don't know what it is, but I swear as soon as you try it out, you'll see that your performances get much better in handheld.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, it's also the concept that you're capturing something that's really happening and the camera's not ahead of the action.
Right.
The camera's following the action and seeing things, all of a sudden, and you see this a lot in The Last Exorcism that, as they're moving through a scene, it's like the camera is like, it'll go over and capture something and you're like, oh, did I just see that? What was that? You know what I mean? It's like, it adds a lot more dynamic feel to it.
Yeah, that's really hard to simulate for the cinematographer if you're on take 20 and you've walked through that scene.
Right.
For him to kind of pretend he is very surprised by what just came into frame is kind of an art form in itself.
Okay, well, why don't we jump into that? Can we talk for a little bit about how The Last Exorcism started, how you got involved, meeting with Eli Roth, all of that story?
So I had made Last Exorcism, and Last Exorcism had won the audience Necessary Death and the Audience Award, which changes everything. Or that would be my next piece of advice for the starting filmmaker. Make that feature and then try to get it into festivals, because Hollywood, like very few people in Hollywood, I think, have taste and rely on their own. It's true. It's really crazy. Like I get scripts from studios that are so bad that you go like, not only who wrote this, but which executive read it and said, that's a good idea, let's make this movie. And that's 90% of all scripts. And I think it's really rare. There's a handful of people in Hollywood that trust their own opinion. And what the other people will rely on is other gatekeepers that at some point put a stamp of approval on that project. And film festivals, big film festivals with a good reputation, do that. Like if you screen at Cannes or at South by Southwest, Sundance or AFI Fest or LA Film Festival or something bigger, and you screen there, that's already great. If you win an audience award there or a jury award there, suddenly people will take your movie seriously and they will think the movie is great. Even maybe if it isn't, but they don't really dare to have their own experience. So suddenly after the audience award, there were a lot of agents and managers that wanted to meet. And I learned that, because it's always like everyone always wants an agent and thinks their career will really hit it off when they have an agent, which is nonsense. And also an agent will never want you, like an agent that you have to approach will never want you. You have to make something, again, that agent finds desirable and he wants you. So this whole knocking on people's doors that people are always trying is not going to work, but you have to kind of get the approval of the stamp of approval from some festival if possible, and then they will knock on your doors. Anyway, so I did the rounds with the agents and found an agent, and we were looking at different scripts and couldn't find anything. And then I had the feeling, I had done A Necessary Death, and I had this feeling, I really want Jacob Foreman to see this movie. Jacob Foreman was a screenwriter in my year who wrote All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, and is a really good guy. But we never had that much to do with each other at AFI, and I don't know where this feeling came from that I wanted him to see the movie. But it was just a really strong feeling, so I emailed him and said, I made this movie, can I send it to you? And he said, sure, send it to me. I sent it to him. I don't think he liked it much because he never really commented on it. But what happened like a week or two later was that he was writing a screenplay for a production company called Strike Entertainment. And they had two directors, Huck Butko and Andrew Gerland, on this movie called Cotton, which was an exorcism movie, a fake documentary exorcism movie. And the two directors left the project because they had another project with Will Ferrell at the same time called The Virginity Hit, and they had to decide which one to make, and they were under obligation with Sony to make The Virginity Hit. So suddenly this project didn't have directors, And Jacob, during a lunch break or something, overheard two producers say, man, we lost our directors. Where are we going to find someone who can do a fake documentary horror? And Jacob had Necessary Death in his bag, you know, which I don't believe in fate or the supernatural or anything like that, but I have no explanation for how that okay. And he gave them the movie, and they watched it, and it obviously wasn't a horror movie, but it was exactly the format that they wanted. And so they called me the next day and sent me the script and wanted to meet. And the script was, I think I can say it now, all these years later, was horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. And wasn't written towards a fake documentary, because in a fake documentary, if you really want to sell it as real, then you can't have something spectacular happen in every single scene, because the audience will figure out after 2 scenes that this is obviously not a real documentary. Like in a real documentary, if you catch one amazing moment on camera, people structure a whole documentary around that, you know? So this script kind of had some action sequence with people flying through the air in every scene, and it just didn't work. And I had no interest in making the movie. And I went into the meeting. If I had wanted to make the movie, I think I would have been really, really nervous. But because I basically just came there to say, your script sucks, I'm not going to do it, I wasn't nervous at all. So I told them that very bluntly, no diplomacy involved. And I learned then that there's nothing sexier to Hollywood executives than you not wanting to do their project. Because they're not stupid. They know that the script that they have out there is not brilliant and needs work, as they always call it, needs a polish. But polish always means complete rewrite. And they kind of know that. And then they invite all these directors, like 10, 20 directors, to come in. And 19 of those directors say, this is brilliant. I want to do this. I'm the right guy for this. And there is one guy who comes in and says, this script doesn't work. I don't want to do it. Then suddenly they want the one guy that didn't want to do it. I had that people for other projects that they called and said, we've shown it to 10 directors. 9 of them love it. You didn't want to do it. Could you come in for a second meeting? I said, well, go with one of the people that want to do it. But they want to hear that you have ideas how to make it better and all that. And I basically came out of that meeting with them saying, you can do with the script whatever you want. You can hire your own writer. You can completely rewrite it. We'll give you $1.5 million. Do it. And that was exactly what I needed to hear, because then I brought a writer on board that I loved, that's a genius, who completely rewrote the movie within 4 days or something. And then, Eli was attached. I didn't talk to him in the beginning. I think a couple of weeks later, we had a call scheduled. And now I was nervous because I suddenly was talking to like the horror legend Eli Roth. I think he was on the Inglourious Basterds set in his trailer and had just seen A Necessary Death and was super nice and super complimentary and stuff. And then we went to make the movie, and they let me bring on my cinematographer and my editor. And there was a little bit of a struggle. What I mentioned before, that because they'd never made a fake documentary, they couldn't quite wrap their head around the improv thing. Like they said, we need to see casting tapes, and we can only judge casting tapes, auditions, if we see actors that are doing the same scripted scene, and then we can compare the quality. And I said, well, that's completely useless, because even if it's a great scene and written, it's not going to help you in an improv. They said we have to do it anyway. So I always had to make the actors read the scene. And I knew it wasn't going to make a difference, but for the producers, it was important. And then we went off to Louisiana, to New Orleans, to shoot the movie. And the great thing was that this company, Strike Entertainment, had made all these $100 million movies with Brad Pitt and Robert Redford and whatever. And they had never made a movie under $80 million. So they had no idea what to do with our little $1.5 million movie. So they didn't take it seriously. They meant it when they said, do whatever you want. They meant that. They completely stayed out of it. So the conditions were very close to what we had in Necessary Death. We had a couple of more people, obviously, and the unions required us to have all these people. But there was a whole camera team that we never needed that was just coming in, eating donuts and going home. And I wanted that because I wanted to recreate that intimacy. That was the big strength of working in that format, that you don't have 50 people staring at the actors, and that you don't, for example, have to use the slate, because it turned out to me that clapping the slate and going like scene 14, go, action, basically communicates to the actors, now create artifice. Now try to be someone you are not, you know. So I always try to avoid slating, or we would slate in the other room quietly, secretly, and then kind of walk over with the camera. Because I didn't want them to act. I basically wanted them to be themselves and put themselves into the situation. And we never showed the script to the actors with Last Exorcism. We had a script all written out, which we needed for the investors and for the production company and all that kind of stuff. But it was like my best hidden secret was this script. I knew if I ever showed that to the actors, it would be impossible to get that out of their heads again and make them create it from scratch and come up with all these fresh moments, because they would just try to reproduce the script. And it's amazing if you watch the movie and read the script, how close the two are. I think no one would believe me if it's someone who had read the script and just seen the movie would never believe that the actors never saw the script. But I think it's the same technique. You tell them what motivation they go into the scene with, which is actually very similar to what you do with a movie that has a script. You know, you talk to the actors about where they're coming from and where they want to go, and then let them go and kind of see how that goes. And that's how we did Last Exorcism. And then we came back from this experience that was just really great and started editing. And suddenly everyone was very involved. Suddenly we had a lot of producers in the editing room that had questions. And the ending, like if you've seen Last Exorcism, the thing that was great about the original script was the ending. And that was like the one thing that I was excited about, which was, this only makes sense if you've seen Last Exorcism. But the original ending was they go into the forest, they see the shadow, they hear the noises of the demon, and they run and they don't get killed, and they reappear a week later, and Cotton, our exorcist, now has a full church with hundreds of people, and he's a celebrity, and he gets his own TV show, and he's a star because he has gotten a demon, or as close as possible, on video, and he's basically marketing that. And what was so smart about it is that the whole movie, he tells us what a successful evangelical preacher needs. He needs a hook, which is the demon on video, and everything Cotton does in his little frauds is based on sound, and it's based on lighting and all that kind of stuff. And basically, in the end, it's just the huge version of that. So I wanted the audience to leave the movie as split as they had come in, with the believers saying, no, I saw a demon, and with the cynics, the atheists, saying, oh, it was basically a big PR video, and this exorcist used us and showed us this stuff for financial gain. And I thought that was the smartest thing, that you come out of a movie and you don't even know if you just saw a horror movie or if you just saw a drama about a preacher that has a great marketing idea, And we shot that, and it was our most expensive scene because it needed green screen for the demon, and it needed all these extras and the location of the church and all that stuff. And then we cut it together, and it didn't work. Like, I showed it to 10 friends, and out of those 10 friends, one friend thought it was the greatest ending he'd ever seen, and 9 friends were completely confused and said, we don't know what just happened. And I learned that you can ask a question and not answer it in a movie, but it has to be clear that you're asking the question. And with our ending, it wasn't even clear that we wanted the audience to wonder about whether this was fake or not. They didn't even know what the question was. And we couldn't make it work. And that, of course, I had my shot, and now it was opened up to the group. So every producer, every cousin of a producer, or the cleaning lady of a producer suddenly had ideas about the ending. And then we ended up with one that I don't think does justice to the rest of the movie, but it was the best out of the bunch. And to this day, I don't have a better idea. And I lie awake at night for having screwed up the ending, especially because there was the thing to go in with. But I guess you never get that second chance. It'll always be like that.
Well, it's really difficult to, especially when you're doing a movie like that. I don't know. There's very few movies that have a like completely satisfying ending when it comes to like kind of putting together a mystery, what's going on. They eventually figure it out. And then the ending's never quite like, the build is a lot more important. That's what keeps you going through it.
It's so weird though. I totally agree, but you work towards that ending. Most of the time you have that ending before you have anything else, and then you build the entire movie. to lead towards that ending. Like in screenwriting, you know that as a screenwriter, you need to know where you're going. So the ending is, the big payoff that you are working towards and can't wait to show to the audience. And then the outcome, for some reasons, exactly what you're describing, that it's always weaker than it needs to be because there's all this expectation on it after the 2-hour build-up. And then to pay that off is really hard. You almost need like Fincher's head in the box in Seven or in Fight Club. He's good with the endings that kind of pull the rug right under. But it's rare. It's true. Yeah.
Right. Now, I got so into listening to you, I wasn't even thinking about my next question. How did you, in terms of finding like Ashley Bell and the actors, how was that process?
Well, it was equally hard because our casting director had no idea how to do the improv thing and didn't believe in it and didn't really take the project that seriously, which was kind of hard to overcome. And she thought I was a complete dilettante and didn't know what I was doing, which she didn't tell me to my face. But there was a friend, an actor who was a friend of mine, which she didn't know, and he was auditioning, and she was bitching to him about me not knowing what I wanted, which is exactly true. I didn't know what I want, but that was the point. It was the point to keep it open and keep it free and whatever. I just did improv with the actors, which I still do now with projects that have a script, even if I know they're only going to do scripted lines, because it very quickly tells you something about the energy and the IQ of the actor if they have to come up with their own moments, And it's something, I did an internship with a casting director called Melly Finn, who cast all of Cameron.
Oh, sure, of course.
Titanic and Terminator and all that stuff. And she said, always cast actors not just for how they're acting, but for who they really are. Because when it gets to it and they are tired and you don't have time and you have to rely on them to get you out of that situation, they will always revert to who they really are at their core, which is completely true. But that also means you have to invest in that during the audition. So what I did is I sat in the waiting room and I pretended to be an actor waiting to go in. And I was just chatting up the actors that were waiting to go in. And it's a really interesting moment because it's stressful for an actor. They are nervous. They're trying to prepare. And there's a guy next to them that won't shut up and tries to involve them in some conversation. And how they react to that tells you a lot about who they are. As soon as they know that you're the director, they'll be on their best behavior. And you don't really ever have the chance to get to know them for real until you start shooting. So it was important to me to kind of have that moment. And with Ashley, especially, like, she was so sweet and so supportive. And I think she thought that I was nervous. So she was trying to calm me down because she thought I was going to go in. And it was great. And then she was only the second girl that we saw for that role. And she just killed it. Like, it was so scary to be in the room with her because we improvised the exorcism. We kind of, I think in auditions, you always try to see, hopefully your script has a certain kind of character development and show at least two sides to a character. One is the starting point and one is the end point. So I think it's smart in auditions to kind of have at least two scenes, one scene each that showcases what you're looking for. And if there is no scene in the script that does that, I think it's worth it to just write a script, write a scene for the audition that will never show up in the movie, but just very clearly focuses to see that one side from the actor, because you need to see the range. And then the other thing that I always do is, like, no matter how great the first take is in the audition, because sometimes people come in and they just nail it, you always want to do a second take and change something. And that can be completely random. Again, has nothing to do with the character or the script. Like, sometimes I say, now do it as a 5-year-old child. Now do it as if you are on the electric chair. Now do completely made up stuff, but it tells you something super important, and that is how well can an actor adjust to suggestions, to direction, And because I learned that the hard way during my thesis film, that someone came in and was just amazing, and then on set she just couldn't get there, and it turned out that the night before the audition, her boyfriend had split up with her. And she was just so miserable, and the part was about a miserable drug addict, and she was tired, and that wasn't acting. She was just so great because that really happened to her. And then on set, she couldn't reproduce that. So since then, I've always tried to make sure that you can only really judge how great an actor is if you ask them to do different things with the same material, with the same lines, and see if that's what you're going for. yeah, so that's how we found Ashley. And then The Exorcist was much harder. We saw hundreds of people, and we asked them to make up a sermon on the spot. And Patrick Fabian came in, and he gave this 8-minute long, perfect, immaculate service, and was preaching for 8 minutes. And he talked so fast that I couldn't follow it. I couldn't follow what he was actually saying, but there was this energy that he had that just made me want to kind of go up, stand up and cheer. And that's where this, in Last Exorcism, the banana bread scene comes from.
Yeah, that was great.
So basically the Exorcist, that the Exorcist says, I can tell them anything. I could preach about a banana bread recipe, and they would say hallelujah, and they wouldn't notice, and they make a bet, and he does it. That came from the audition scene, because